Good morning, ladies and gentlemen. We're going to make a start. Welcome to today's Planning Committee meeting. I'm Councillor Karimi Govanlu and I will be chairing the Planning Committee meeting today. On the top table are Richard Smith, Tracy Lincoln, myself, Enna Laming and Lucy Palmer. We are not expecting a fire drill today, but if the alarm does sound, the fire exits are clearly signed in green. This meeting is being live streamed. Members of the public are welcome to film the proceedings as long as they are not disruptive to the conduct of the meeting. If anyone wishes to film, record this meeting, please identify yourselves now. Thank you. Please can you ensure all mobile phones and electronic devices are turned to silent. Councillors, please do not use your mobile phone whilst the committee is in session. We will have comfort breaks if needed at various times. If you must use your mobile, then please leave the room. However, you will appreciate this could result in you not being able to vote on the matter under discussion at the time you leave the room. The order of business is as set out on the agenda. Members of the public can only speak if prior arrangements have been made in accordance with the Council's scheme of public speaking. The time allocated is a maximum of 5 minutes per speaker parish council. Only people who have registered to speak will be able to address the committee. The order will be as follows. The planning officer will present the application. Public speakers will then be asked to present their case, followed by questions from members of the committee to clarify something the speaker has said and not to invite the speaker to put further points across. The order of public speaking is parish town council first, followed by objectors and finally supporters, e.g. the applicant or the agent. Council members who are not members of this committee will then be invited to speak for the allocated time of a maximum of 5 minutes per speaker. This will be followed by questions from members of the committee. Again, these questions are only to clarify something the speaker has said and not to invite the speaker to put further points across. The committee will then discuss and determine the application. Finally, there is no provision for members of the public to circulate documents, photographs, etc. at the meeting. Are there any questions before I open the meeting? No, thank you. Declarations of interest. I understand we've all been lobbied by the applicant. Lucy, any others? Joe?
Thank you, Chair. Yes, I have a small farm business within Broadland, and I've also worked within agriculture, but I have no connection at all to the Alban-wise group of companies or its owner, Count Patchouli. I'm also the ward member for Coltishall, but I've not had any involvement with the applicants for the applications in Coltishall. And the last application at South Walsham is in the watershed catchment area of the Broads Internal Drainage Board, which I sit on. Thank you.
Are there any other? Nigel, please. Okay, can we go to apologies, please, Lucy?
Yes, Chair, we've had apologies from Councillor Orber, Councillor Baby and Councillor Leggett.
Thank you. We turn to the minutes of the last meeting on the 26th of March. Joe, I understand you want to bring something up on that.
Thank you, Chair. It was the application, Mr Murrell's application at Heath Farm. The minutes say that the panel voted unanimously, and that wasn't the case. I voted against, and I believe Councillor Berry did too.
That's right.
Thank you, Chair.
Thanks, Joe. Is everyone else happy with the minutes? Yep, thank you. Right, we'll carry on to applications. Application 1 is application from Alban-wise Synergy Limited. Outlines a 40-year project incorporating solar panels, dual land provisions and measures to minimise local diversity. That's application 20243676, and I'll ask Richard to present, please.
Thank you, Chair. It's probably worth just mentioning on that, as in the update sheet, the applicant is Alban Wise Limited and not as on the report, which states Alban Wise Synergy Limited, just to be correct on that one. Thank you. Okay, so thank you, Chair. So this is a renewable energy generating project, including photovoltaic panels, supporting infrastructure, including inverters, transformers, substation, battery energy storage system, fencing, CCTV cameras, access tracks, and biodiversity and landscape mitigation. This is a temporary permission that's been applied for, and the temporary consent would run for 40 years. This is on land east of Nowhere Lane, Reetham. So this is a site edged red. It's set to the west of Reetham. As you can see, the applicant's other owned land is shown in blue. This Google Maps image shows the site edged red. It is just over 81 hectares in size and consists of arable agricultural land. The application presented today is for the solar farm and battery storage principally. This slide shows the expected future point of connection, which the applicants have referenced throughout their application. Any cable route linking the site with South Substation would be subject to a separate future plan application or works package undertaken otherwise as a statutory undertaker. This slide shows some key listed buildings identified in a surrounding 1 kilometre search area. It also shows the site relative to the conservation area of Reetham, which is to the southeast as cross-hatched, which is just outside the 1 kilometre search area. The slide also shows some identified non-designated heritage assets which are around the site, namely Hall Farm, Hall Farm Cottages, and Whitwell and Reetham Heritage Railway Station. Further afield of note is the Grade 1 listed Church of St Mary at Sparham. This slide shows the Marriotts Way Norfolk Trail route. The site is on the east boundary and is immediately adjacent or near to a 900 metre section of the overall 26-mile long route, which otherwise runs from Norwich to Elsham. This is a leisure and recreational route principally, which is, given its former use as a heritage line, is also classified, as I mentioned, as a non-designated heritage asset. Okay, should we try that? Is that a bit better? Yeah, okay. So this slide here shows the east of the site, setting the context of some important nature conservation designations. So on the east we've got Booton Common. We've also got Foxley Wood off to the west. You've also got some other interests in terms of the Norfolk Valley Fens Special Area of Conservation. And as you can see, these are set slightly further afield from the site. Slightly closer to the site, you do have some county wildlife sites in blue, and these are dotted around the site locally. These are generally more found on the east, southeast and south sides of the site. This slide shows the designations and features together, which will give you a baseline of key information. So you've got listed buildings, which are the blue triangles, triple SIs, you've got the county wildlife sites, as we've just been talking about. You've also got habitat woodlands, public rights of way, housing site allocations, and these are all considered as part of the baseline of information that we assess the application against. So this is the landscape master plan and site layout. The proposed scheme is divided into 9 fields for ease of reference, and reflecting the existing field patterns, boundaries are set either side of the diagonal cable route that is the Vanguard Norfolk Boreas project being developed by RWE. The cable route currently being constructed by RWE is set across a much wider line from offshore wind turbines off the North Norfolk coast and connecting to the National Grid substation at Necton. This follows development consent orders awarded by the Secretary of State as nationally significant infrastructure projects, and those projects determined at national level sit alongside this planning application as which is to be determined by the local planning authority. This slide shows a closer image of the northern half of the site. This also shows the position of the battery storage element, which is set fairly central, supposedly to obviously optimise its position away from the boundaries and to make considered use of the natural screening that also exists. The battery storage system is to ensure a more stable and efficient supply of electricity to the grid, discharged when peak demands are realised. These are increasingly likely to be prevalent given that renewable energy will have a level of intermittent supply based on weather and seasonal patterns. Access to the site is proposed principally off the B1145, which aligns to the northern boundary. Currently, RWE have developed an access in the autumn last year, which this solar project would eventually look to take over as the key principal access. In the meantime, the application proposes a temporary construction access to the west of that access, that RWE access, which will be removed upon completion of the project installation. Conditions would apply to the arrangements here around construction traffic management and a temporary traffic regulation order, limiting speed to 30 miles an hour along the site frontage, whilst construction work takes place over a period which is not expected to be longer than 8 to 10 months. This is the southern half of the site. You have a maintenance access which doubles up as an emergency access, and this is very much a reserve access shown off Lodge Lane, and this is only to be used if the main B1145 access is unavailable for any particular reason. This slide shows a solar panel design typical of their installation, set on lightweight metal structures with a maximum 3 metres in height. This slide shows a typical modular power unit which are sporadically set around the development for solar power produced. These steel structures will be colour finished green as controlled under condition. Now within the battery storage area, this slide shows the typical structures that could be screened, that would be screened by a double layer of fencing enclosure. The structures here would again be coloured green, as would the fencing proposed. This slide shows the fencing and the gate designs, again coloured green, to the site boundaries, which are designed with mammal openings to allow small animals like hares to continue to traverse through the site. This slide shows a double layer of enclosure to the battery storage, as we've just been talking about. It includes more acoustic fencing and gates to provide an inner leaf, and then it's supplemented by further green weld mesh fencing around the perimeter. This image shows the water storage containers, which are designed and installed to further optimise site safety. Designed to a capacity of nearly 100,000 litres apiece, they would not expect to be routinely used, and again a suitable colour for their exterior design will be controlled under condition. Notwithstanding, Anglian Water have indicated that a main supply may also be very much possible to further supplement and serve the site itself. In coming to some photos now, so we will start on the northwest corner between the junction of the B1145 and Nowhere Lane, and we will route clockwise around the perimeter of the site. So the yellow arrows or stars, as you can see that one in the top left of the image, is the position where the view or the image is being viewed from. This is set at the northwest corner and angles towards the site from the junction of Nowhere Lane where it meets the B1145. Whilst viewing the site from the north, this slide shows closer the proposed construction access set to the west of the current RWE cable corridor construction access. It also shows the level of landscaping that you will see on the northern boundary in due course. This slide, staying on that northern boundary again, shows the construction routing with all the construction traffic to be accommodated via the A47 and onto the B1145 before arriving at site, indicated by the blue arrow. So now at the other end of the northern boundary, this photo is looking west, and it shows the approach that you would see from Reefham, and as arrowed you can see the new RWE access. So this Google Maps image from October last year shows where the new RWE access has been installed, again when viewed looking west. This slide shows the approximate position of the temporary construction access to the development. Again, this view is towards the west and is obviously just positioned a bit further along the B1145. So now we're going a little bit further back towards Reefham. This image is the first of a few taken along Marriotts Way whilst moving southeast. So this view is taken just off the B1145. The site is to the right at the high level, but is also at this point very well screened. The route continues through the former railway cutting before eventually rising to a plateau. On the right, the development side at these points is still very well screened. As we move further, eventually we will see some views of the site, although still these are broken up in sections by existing tree and hedgerow coverage. At the point of the agricultural access into the site, this image shows where some more open views will be obtainable at present. The land rises with the view as it undulates, and the landscape and visual impact assessment has equally picked up on these characteristics in some detail, and a landscape-led design master plan has been proposed to further mitigate these views in the longer term. So this includes a section of tree planting to the north of Field 3, which would join with existing green corridors and smaller wooded areas to further screen the development in those longer views. The design will also be controlled under condition, with the proposals all contained within the red line boundary. So still moving now further along the land to the southeast, it becomes flatter again, and the establishment and the supplementary gap filling of boundaries in the landscape master plan will assist in providing a good screen going forward. Moving along, this 2018 Google Maps image doesn't show it, but there is an extended area of recently planted tree cover which now exists to further screen views of Field 3 in particular. Moving further along, this typical image shows where some gaps do exist, but again these would be filled with further planting to supplement what is already currently available. Moving along Marriotts Way, as the route now moves away from the site boundary, it is well screened still at this point. Again, just following the yellow star there where we are, as you can see the boundary is now a bit further to the west. However, there are still some more sporadic glimpse views of Hall Farm and Hall Farm cottages as the route moves further south towards the Heritage Railway Station. Now onto the former railway line viaduct. The crossing here shows some views again of the development site from further afield. The solar farm would, however, be screened with considerable further planting to the rear of Hall Farm cottages at this area. And now moving further away from the Marriotts Way route, we are now within the car park of the Heritage Railway Station, and again some glimpsed views only of the non-designated heritage asset that is the obviously this railway station, but also Hall Farm cottages. So now going at a lower level down onto the roadside, we are in a similar location, but these views are on the approach to the viaduct as you come around the corner on Whitwell Road. We're now moving west off that junction, and we're now looking towards Hall Farm cottages from Whitwell Road. This view is at a lower level than the site itself, and this is a more open point from the road. So this slide shows the area of woodland planting that's proposed to help screen the views of solar panels from points such as the last slide showed. Swale and attenuation basin installations around this will complement and help to supplement the existing nature conservation benefits of the site here. The proposal would overall provide a near 14% increase in biodiversity net gain in habitat units and a near 27% increase in biodiversity net gain for hedgerow units. Further west, moving along Whitwell Road at a high level now, we're looking back to the junction that's shared with Lodge Lane, and this is the view towards the east at the very southern end of the site. This slide shows an extract from the detailed landscape visual impact assessment, and these images have showed and helped to inform the design approach to landscaping and the comments of the landscape architect. At points like this, where the hedgerows would benefit from thicker, more consistent coverage in screening, it's been suggested to mix in some evergreen species like holly to provide an even better level of all year round boundary treatment coverage. So now moving up Lodge Lane, this shows a typical image of the well-established boundary treatment. The solar farm would be on the right-hand side here of the hedging. Further along, the points show existing farm accesses into field 5, 6 and 9, and this view is looking broadly east. So moving a bit further up Lodge Lane, field 5, this is adjacent to field 5 looking northwest. Again, the existing good coverage of the hedgerows that crisscross the site help to show how these will break up longer views of the panels. So moving further northwest now off Lodge Lane at the junction with Nowhere Lane. This shows a Google Maps image again from October last year, not long after works have been undertaken to clear the route for the cable corridor by RWE. This would be supplemented with new planting along the boundary here in the medium term once the RWE works have been concluded. This view is from the edge of a farming muck pad and shows some views across towards the east. Again, planned new hedgerow planting would enclose this area. So some images now of the Grade 2 listed Hackford Hall on the west side. The top left image shows a view looking west from Nowhere Lane. The bottom right image shows the opposite perspective back towards the site, and when the existing tree coverage that does exist, which filters views of the site. These may be obtainable, views of the panels may be obtainable from the upper windows in winter months, and so to further help mitigate this less than substantial harm that's been identified, we have further additional planting proposed to add to this tree edge cover. As you can see otherwise though, the street view images show how there is already a really good baseline of tree planting that exists to help separate the site from the listed Hackford Hall. This image shows where the tree cover eventually starts to merge into more hedgerow cover and the other existing farm access into the fields, where there will be also a temporary construction compound. And interestingly to note, this temporary construction compound is set well away from any residential property altogether. This image shows the LVIA, the Landscape Visual Impact Assessment, and the zone of visual influence used, and the visual viewpoints selected to help inform that assessment from key points around the site and locality. So this viewpoint 20, for instance, shows the distance from a point just east of the Grade 1 listed Church of St Mary at Sparham. This gives perspective on the depth of view and the vegetation that intervenes. So this slide here shows the agricultural land classification map across Norfolk. The site and the search radius used around Sale point of connection is shown, much of which can be seen as you can see there, shows Norfolk covered by Grade 3 land, which is that green colour. This shows the site in greater detail where consideration of alternative sites labelled A to E was undertaken. You can see the paler colour there, which is grade 2 agricultural land. This slide shows the routes of the offshore wind development consent order projects for both Vanguard, Norfolk Boris in dashed blue, and Sheringham Shoal in dashed green, and Hornsey Free in dashed red. A and B roads in solid red and yellow are also respectively shown. The site edge red, you can just see that at the very southwestern edge of the circle. This slide shows the biodiversity net gain plans, which include planting and pond creation and wildflower grassland. And so coming to a conclusion now, so in summary, the proposal would provide a source of clean, green, renewable energy, enough to expect it to provide the equivalent of approximately providing over 14,000 homes with clean electricity. This is a welcome and noteworthy offer in respect of policy GC5 of the Development Management DPD and policy 2 of the GNLP. National guidance in the form of the NPPF and the PPG and recent white papers gives strong, significant national support to the principle of the development involving renewable clean energy and the contribution this can give to the UK's aim of meeting a net zero target by 2050. Much consideration has been given to the impacts of the development upon the landscape, ecology, trees, aviation, best and most versatile agricultural land, highway safety and heritage assets. These matters are, however, considered to be successfully dealt with a raft of consultations that have resulted in no objections through the submission of investigative documentation together with some mitigation and enhancement measures. So overall, taking into account the guidance of policy GC5 and policy 2 of the GNLP, the solar farm is considered to policy GC5 of the Development Management DPD, as you mentioned. The solar farm is considered to constitute an appropriate form of green energy development in the countryside, where impacts have been made acceptable. The recommendation, Chair, as per the update, is to authorise the Assistant Director of Planning to approve, subject to conditions and completion of a unilateral undertaking for the monitoring of biodiversity net gain. And lastly, as an update to that which is specified on the update sheet, we've received very late yesterday some suggested conditions from Norfolk County Council Highways, and these generally reflect those recommended in the list at the end of the report. However, we have added in a couple of extra ones further to their advice, and that includes number 24, which would be access gates to open inwards into the site, and number 25, which would be the condition of the 30-mile-an-hour temporary traffic regulation order. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you, Richard, for a very comprehensive report. Before I ask committee, I just have one question. Number 23 on the conditions, decommissioning plan, just for the committee's benefit, does that include financial guarantees to ensure the post-commissioning repairs of the land?
It hasn't got anything specific about the exact sort of financial implications, but it would be, it's based on the standard wording of the decommission plan, whereby we look very carefully at restoring the land to its former use as agricultural land. So things like, the soil that would be removed, etc., would be cleaned and put back. Obviously, what you should find at the end of that period is that it would be returned exactly as you find it on day one.
Thank you. Any clarification for the committee? Jo, please.
Thank you, Chair. I had a drive around the area at the weekend just to have a look at it on the ground, and actually RWE are very developed in their cable route now. The accesses are all tarmacked. It looks like a big swathe through the countryside. It's about 70 metres wide, and the whole road is coming through the middle of it. And as I understand it, these wind farm corridors, the cable route corridors, do get funding in phases. So I think that the cable route will be the development of it will be in operation for several years, over several phases, sort of maybe 8 to 12 years even. So I have concerns that this is running straight through the middle of this proposed solar park. Also, there are solar panels on either side of the cable route, and the battery storage is more on the sort of the south side of it, nearer the old railway line. How do they propose to connect the two sides of this solar this solar park together? Will there be an overhead cable that goes across the 70 metres or so of the cable route? I've also got grave concerns about this connecting to Saul substation, which is almost 5 kilometres away. I mean, I think we're looking at this and we have no indication of whether this will be able to connect to Saul substation. So I would like more information on that, such as, have there been easements agreed with other landowners when they have to cross their land to get back to the substation? Thank you, Chair.
Richard, you like to respond?
Yeah, in terms of the first point, in terms of the transition between the either side of the cable corridor, I'd probably best leaving that one to Chris Banks, if that's okay, because he'd be able to talk a bit more about the technical and the legal arrangements in place, and that includes with RWE. In terms of obviously the connection to South Substation, that would be fundamentally a separate application. It's not unusual to separate out the cable routes from the actual main application, and that gives obviously further time and obviously detailed analysis in terms of how that route would be taken. And obviously, you know, factors such as RWE's presence will probably help dictate exactly how that cable route corridor is routed. But there are different options, whether it comes in as a new application, new plan application, alongside this one today, or it could be done through statutory undertaking, for instance, if it was to obviously be utilising the road network. So we do deal with them individually and on their own merits, but cumulatively we assess them together from an environmental impact point of view.
Maybe ask the agent when he comes. Yeah. Peter, you had a question.
Thank you, Chair. Good morning and happy St George's Day to everybody. Thank you, Richard, for a very thorough presentation. You did mention about the water supply for the site. My concern, or one of my concerns, is regarding in a very dry part of the country, or two, is also the effect of how laying the infrastructure on to get the water to supply to the site, and also the effect it might have on surrounding areas if we were to withdraw more water from that for the supply of the site. Thank you, Richard.
Yep, so obviously you've got a series of water storage containers on site. These would be filled from the point of operation. Water would be brought in obviously through the access routes that exist, and those would be monitored and obviously filled as and when necessary. Obviously it's hoped that they would be not used. Having said that, when we went through consultation with Anglian Water, there was also, it appeared, an option that Anglian Water were willing to look into providing an additional main source. They suggested in their consultation that should be available, so one would like to think that supply won't be an issue in terms of water capacity, but the technical arrangements of that, which are very much separate to the application, do not necessarily need to be controlled to make the application acceptable, but they are a sort of double layer of water capacity if and when was required. So it was heartening to know that you've got not only the water storage on site, which is designed to safely obviously deal with any fire that was to happen, but obviously supplemented by the additional mains if and when it was connected. But that's very much down to Anglian Water to agree that with the landowner and the applicant.
Bill, please.
I'd like to ask, thank you, Chair. I'd like to ask, the listed building, Hackford Hall, what view are they going to have apart from looking over those solar panels? Is it going to alter the vista?
So they will get very glimpsed views. We went through detailed consultation with Historic England and between ourselves and obviously the Senior Conservation Heritage Officer, Design Officer, we established that there would be very, very slight filter views at the very upper windows of Hackford Hall, which is a big property in itself. So obviously to supplement that additional level of sight that you could obviously establish from the upper windows, we've put more boundary treatment planting into that sort of west side of the site. As I say, it was very, very glimpsed views that were suggested would be seen, and it was only in winter months. So Historic England, and we agreed with them, suggested this would be a very limited, less than substantial harm, as they technically call it. So in terms of sort of stronger, clearer views, we feel that there won't be really any change to perception generally all year round.
Also, looking at the roads on your slides, they're very, very narrow. How are you going to get the construction traffic moving, plus the local residents?
So all the construction traffic would come off the B1145. Obviously, we've been in consultation with Norfolk County Council Highways, and that obviously, as you'd expect from day one, was their principal concern, was that all the construction traffic comes off this B road network that obviously adjoins the A47. And in terms of obviously the actual routing of the construction traffic, you've got the compound there on that sort of more northwestern end. And there'll be a series of tracks that transverse through the site, including 2 points of crossing, or 3 points of crossing actually, across the cable corridor, which will help to obviously dissipate the construction as it gradually develops the fields. In terms of obviously the rural roads, it's not expected that these would ever have to be used for construction traffic. If there was a very, very, very unusual circumstance where there was a road closure or some sort of emergency works or whatever, then obviously we have left that under condition to be controlled, that should there be ever a need to obviously use that access, it would be controlled through the agreement of Norfolk County Council. So it's not expected that the rural roads will be used for construction traffic, and everything should come off that main B road. The rural roads will be just then left for any potential use in the future as emergency and maintenance traffic, but again, all of that traffic would again be expected to come off the B road.
And would there be any expected disruption to Marriott's Way?
So Marriott's Way should remain open at all times. I'm not aware that there will be any reason to close it. All the site is contained from within, and all the construction traffic comes, as I say, from the B road. So there's no reason why, as far as I'm aware, that it should ever have to be closed. Obviously, if that was ever to change, we'd need to obviously go for agreement with Norfolk County Council Public Rights of Way, but there's no indication that would need to be closed.
Anybody else, or can we move on? Okay, move on to public speakers. We have Councillor Tom Hill. Would you like to come to the front, please? There, please. You have, Councillor Hills, you have 5 minutes from when you start speaking, and if you press the right-hand button to speak.
Okay, good morning, everybody. Reefham Town Council objections have been submitted, and I hope they'll be considered. I'm not here to reiterate those. I wanted to raise one particular point for consideration, but actually my fund has been stolen because it's to do with the access to Saul. Pettywell, as we saw on the map, is to the west of Reefham, Saul substations to the east. We understood when this project was presented to the council that there'll be a limit approximately 5 kilometres before they have too much power loss, which kind of suggests that their access to Saul is going to go straight through Reefham town. They didn't present a route to us, but they did say it would be buried, so it looks like we would have to suffer more disruption to the roads. And as you may know, Reefham's been subjected to a lot of disruption lately with the wind farm projects and the broadband installations. So I don't see how this planning can be approved in isolation from the access to Saul. And that's really the point I wanted to make, was I'd like you to consider these two projects together so we understand exactly what Reefham Town disruption will be. And that's really my point. I'm sure I'm inside 5 minutes. Thank you.
Any questions for the speaker? No? Oh, Joe, go on.
Thank you, Mr. Hills. So you're a member of the Town Council and you've been given no indication at all where the route to connect to the Saul substation will be over the 5 kilometres or so?
That's correct, yeah.
Mr. Hills, if you'd like to return to your seat, please. And I would like to call Hugh Ivans. Mr. Ivans, you have 5 minutes to speak.
Madam Chair and councillors, I live right next to the proposed site of Field Cottage, Whitwell Hall. I am objecting to the proposal as a local resident and also on behalf of 128 supporters of my online petition, Say No to Pettywell Solar Farm. The majority are local and include Norwich, and although the officer's report mentions a petition, it does not give the reasons for their objections, which are the loss of prime agricultural land, the environmental impact, visual and social concerns, and inappropriate location. Some of you may know that I was a senior planning officer at Cromer, and I am familiar with planning policies and procedures and ministerial statements. In fact, the latest publication from NESO, the government's National Energy System Operator, on the 5th of November 2024, Clean Power by 2030, which is not mentioned by either the applicant or the officer's report, states on page 61, the connections queue currently comprises a greater volume of projects than required for 2030 across our pathways. However, the principal planning document for decision-making is the National Planning Policy Framework, which was first published in March 2012 and has had 8 updates, with the last in February 2025. It's important to note that there are 2 specific statements that have been consistent and not altered, amended or withdrawn during that period, which shows how important they still are for decision-making. The first statement is that proposals must be seen to be making an effective use of land, and we all know that land is a finite resource. This brings the proposal into question, as the 40 megawatt solar panel and battery scheme, where 90% is on land classified as best and most versatile agricultural land, cannot be said to be making an effective use of that land. It is a known fact that renewable energy generation with solar panels is extremely inefficient, and in some cases, around 2/3 of the energy created by the site is lost through the inverters, transformers, and cable when it is transmitted to the grid. Also, the panels generally have a life of around 25 years, during which time they lose 20% of their efficiency and need replacing. This raises the question that solar panels are better sited on former airfield, brownfield sites, car park, building and roof etc., that are closer to the end user, rather than what will be the largest single-use industrial site in rural Broadland. Conversely, the use of land for agricultural production is a much more effective use of BMV-graded agricultural land, and much more use is now made of animal manure and compost to provide essential nutrients to support crop growth and pest management. No amount of greenwashing will alter the fact that the proposed solar power station is on BMV agricultural land. The second statement is that proposal must be seen to recognise the intrinsic character and beauty of the countryside. It's important to note that it does not refer to landscape such as AMB's, Triple SI's, National Park and the Broads, etc., as these areas have their own protected status. The reference to countryside in this instance is much more general and would include the countryside area around Reetham, including the application site. This area does have an intrinsic character and beauty of its own, which had made the town an important holiday destination. The officer's report mentions the Marriott's Way, and that this short section will not alter the wider experience of the near 25-mile stretch. This short section is named the Reetham Circular Walk and is extensively used by local residents and holidaymakers. The requirement for a 40-year temporary period has no planning basis. It is simply a commercial agreement between two parties. A more relevant planning period would be 25 years, so that the site can be revisited by the next unitary authority in 2050. Finally, members will be aware of a number of similarities with the Horsford proposal you determined last August, and I hope you will reach the same conclusion with this much larger scheme that is simply in the wrong place. Thank you.
Thank you. Any questions to speakers? No? Thank you, Mr. Ivans. You can return to your seat. We move on to supporters. We have Chris Banks, the applicant, and Lisa Jackson. Would you like to come forward, please? I understand you're both speaking, so you have 5 minutes each. Thank you.
Good morning, Chair and members of the committee. I'm here today representing Alban Wise, which has been farming in Norfolk for nearly 50 years, and we're proposing the Pettywell Solar Farm and Battery Energy Storage Scheme on 80 hectares of our land holding. There is a fundamental need to transition away from fossil fuels in our electricity generation, and by supporting the UK's legally binding targets to combat climate change and reducing the reliance on imported energy, our proposal contributes meaningfully to the shift towards a greener and more secure energy future. Solar power, both ground and roof mounted, as well as other forms of renewable generation, are all key components to this strategy. Our site has a rated electrical capacity of 40 megawatts, and thanks to Norfolk's relatively sunny climate, it will generate an equivalent energy to that consumed by approximately 14,000 homes a year, which is approximately 1/4 of the homes in Broadland. And this will offset nearly 6,500 tonnes of CO2 annually. Within the 80 hectare or 200 acre red line boundary, solar panels will occupy just under 60% of the site. Roadways and hard standing takes up a very small percentage of the site, with the remainder being land which is not developed. Because of shading, proximity to the edges of fields, and some other site-specific features we have taken account of in the design of the site, the solar panels, the areas have not developed because of shading and proximity to field boundaries. The solar panels themselves will be mounted on frames with gaps between all the panels and are supported by shallow-driven, small cross-section metal piles. The disturbance to the ground will therefore be minimal. and beneath the panels a grass seed mix will be planted to help stabilise the soil. The current crops grown on this site are mostly commodity crops, which the UK is often an exporter of. If consented, the ground here will be removed from routine cultivation for 40 years and avoid the associated application of agrochemicals, allowing it to rest and regenerate. By increasing the integrity of the soil, rainwater flows will be better managed, and it is expected that the soil quality will improve by the end of the project, allowing it to easily return to agricultural use. The mix of open grassland and shelter provided by the panels provides great conditions for sheep grazing. Whilst the sheep enjoy the grazing area, they also offset the need for site-wide mowing. At least 5 metre wide corridors will be maintained either sides of the hedges and field boundaries, and the project also includes more than 1 kilometre of new planting for trees and hedges and reinforcements of those which are currently there, thus reinforcing biodiversity across the site and supporting visual screening. Furthermore, a combined total of 3 hectares of wildflower meadows will be established in the shaded areas and those which are set aside to protect viewpoints into the site. There will also be 2 new ponds and over 100 bird and bat boxes. These enhancements ensure that nature will benefit alongside renewable energy production. At the centre of the project there is a hard standing area of approximately 0.4 acres, and this is where the cables of the solar panels are brought together ready for the electricity to be exported from the site, and this also includes a small fenced compound which contains the battery system. The battery energy storage system complements the solar farm, improving both the quantity and quality of the electrical supply. On quantity, the battery will store excess midday solar generation and release it later in the day when there is the peak of demand in the late afternoon and early evening. And on quality, batteries help stabilise the local distribution network, ensuring a more consistent and renewable energy supply. The project has a signed connection agreement with UK Power Networks and has done for many years, and is intended to connect to the Seoul substation via underground cables to supply the local network. The precise routing to the Seoul substation is still being finalised, with a focus on minimising disruption to the local community and the environment. Once confirmed, it will be publicly communicated, and where applicable, it will be subject to its own planning application, complete with relevant surveys and assessments, on the fundamental basis that the project needs to have the cable route agreed in order to proceed. We expect that we are on track to be able to connect in 2027. However, the electricity grid is currently going through a major period of reformation, and developments continue arising with National Grid and Ofgem, which could have a bearing on how these projects progress. In conclusion, we believe we have decided a site which observes the specific needs and constraints of this site. It maximises green electricity contribution whilst capitalising on the opportunities to improve biodiversity. I therefore respectfully ask for your support in granting planning permission for the project.
Thank you. I'd like to go to Lisa Jackson.
Thank you, Madam Chairman. I'm Lisa Jackson. I'm the planning agent for this application. And the case officer has set out a very comprehensive report, but I'd like to highlight 3 main points: the choice of the site location, the traffic associated with the development, and the temporary change to the arable use of the site. As we explained, the grid connection is 5 kilometres from the site. So as set out by the officer in his presentation, this allowed us to examine alternatives within that radius. However, we did not find a suitable site with a lower grade of agricultural land. In locating the development within the applicant's own land holding, we worked very hard to locate the development to cause as little harm to the community and the landscape as possible. We engaged in pre-application discussions with officers and the local community, holding an information event before submission and just as the application was submitted. I attended the parish council meeting where this application was considered and answered questions from both the town council and residents. We considered during the design evolution to demonstrate how the proposal would address key issues before submission for planning, and it is notable that removing an area of panels south of Lodge Lane reduced the potential impact, and this was supported by a number of commentators, including local objectors, who had raised this at the local engagement sessions. We developed a landscape-led approach to locate the development where the least number of people would experience it, considering at the outset the potential for screen planting as part of site selection. We selected the location where we could adequately screen and protect those dwellings close to the site. For this proposal, the zone of visual influence is very small. The majority of the viewing zone consists of agricultural fields where there is no public access, and the potential visual receptors within the public domain are limited to passing views on the local roads and glimpses on Marriott's Way on the short stretches that are not in cutting. While some areas of the solar farm will be visible in the short term, the extensive planting will restrict visibility in the medium and long term. And all the planting secured as part of this development will remain when the solar equipment is removed after 40 years. In terms of traffic, once operational, there will be very few visits to the site using a 4x4 car or van, as most of the site monitoring is done remotely. During the 8 to 10 month construction period, there will be increased traffic, but in responding to concerns about construction access, we have revised the access arrangements in discussion with the Highway Authority. Suitable mitigation will be included in the requirement for a detailed construction traffic management plan secured by condition. Local construction traffic can be managed. In addition, it will also displace the heavy farm traffic for 40 years of the operation of this site. And with regard to the change to the arable use, the Hackford land holding is 375 hectares, that's about 926 acres. The farming business operates mainly arable enterprise, growing cereal-based crop rotation comprising winter wheat, spring barley, vining peas, sugar beet and forage maize. The farming regime adopted is determined by the poorest quality on the site, and in addition, droughtiness is a limitation for the grade 2 and grade 3A soils, which can reduce germination and is increasingly problematic with climate change. So 20% of the farm holding will be used by this development, and that won't prevent arable farming being sustained on the remainder of the holding. Whilst there will be some temporary loss of reduction of arable production, agriculture will continue as the scheme is designed to allow sheep to graze beneath the panels. So in conclusion, the high levels of irradiation here could produce enough electricity to power over 14,000 dwellings, significantly supporting national targets and the Council's own climate emergency plan. In addition, national planning policy was strengthened in December last year to give significant weight to renewable energy production, and references to considering food security were removed from national planning policy in relation to plan making. We believe the benefits of the proposal will significantly outweigh the minor harms of this temporary and entirely reversible development. We believe that the proposed benefits from very limited and localised and temporary visual impact, a valid grid offer, the opportunity for battery storage in addition to the renewable generation, the continuation of agricultural use, and with no outstanding objections from statutory consultees, we therefore respectfully request that you support your officer's recommendation for approval. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Any questions for either of the speakers? Jo?
Thank you, Chair. I would just like to ask, well, either Chris or Lisa, the cable route coming through is probably about 70 metres wide. You've got solar panels either side of the Vattenfall cable route. How are you going to connect the two sides in the first instance? Thank you.
Thank you for the question. So the corridor itself is 45 metres in width, and how we have addressed crossing the cable corridor to bring fields 1 and 4 into the rest of the project is to focus our attention onto the northern crossing point between fields 1 and 2, and this has been done in discussion with RWE, and negotiations on legal agreements covering this are ongoing. What we have here is where the cables, or RWE's cables, are entering a horizontal directional drill and therefore go a lot deeper to cross the Marriott's Way before resurfacing to the north. And because you have that increased separation where the RWE cables are going to something like 20 metres below the surface, then that allows for a space of land where we can then lay our cables through regular trenching to ensure that we've got enough separation between our cables and the surface and our cables and RWE's cables to avoid interference.
Can I just ask an additional question? Is that easement actually in place? And another thing I wanted to ask you was, I'm wondering how efficient this project will be when you look at connecting nearly 5 kilometres to Sewell substation. Have there been easements agreed with local landowners to take your connection through? Because I'm quite surprised those plans are not advanced, because you would think that that application would be coterminous with this application. And I just wondered what you thought about that.
Okay, so just to clarify, I recognise there were 3 points in your question. So one was easements with RWE, secondly, the efficiency, the electrical efficiency, and thirdly, on the easements of the cable route. Is that correct? Yes. Okay. So the discussions with RWE for general crossing of the land are ongoing and nearing completion. And that will cover, firstly, their rights of crossing the land and the wider Hackford estate with the cables. And then also all the matters of where their cables interface with our solar farm, vice versa, and permits that. So that is a point which we are continuing to work with RWE on. And as I mentioned, we've had very productive conversations with their construction team, such as the design of the crossings to the north. The second point on electrical efficiency, yes, it is deemed electrical efficiency because that fundamentally feeds into whether we deem the project to be a feasible and viable connection. I believe the councillor from the town council was talking about the 5 kilometre search area and what that means to ultimately be able to export the power. So when we look at site searching and therefore the length of cable, the 5 kilometres, which is a direct line, is acknowledged that that is going to be a more wiggly route. So it's going to be longer than that. And that is set on the basis that beyond, as you start to go beyond that, then it becomes problematic.
Can I also add as well, there was a recent decision about this in a planning inspector, and the inspector said to the interested parties, whilst I note there are concerns raised about the efficiency of solar farms and their ability to produce power, the government clearly identifies solar energy as a form of renewable energy which they want to see significant growth, and the efficiency of panels has improved. And he also said we can't question the ability of the efficiency as part of the planning consideration, because it is a requirement of the need for the country's generation for renewable energy.
Thank you. I'm not actually questioning the efficiency of the PV panels. I'm questioning whether it is efficient to connect over 5 kilometres away to Saul substation. It seems an awful long way away, and you don't seem to have an indicative route or possibly any easements with the landowners en route to take this cable which is needed to get to the substation. That's what I'm questioning, the efficiency of that.
Yeah, so that's the third point we've come to. So the 5 kilometres in the distance is certainly not uncommon, and I've certainly seen projects with longer connections. So the efficiency or the drop of any electrical capacity that comes from that is not an issue in the design of the project and its overall operation. On the point of the design and the routing, we've taken forward the planning application for the site itself, because that's very much a binary point of consent or no consent for the solar farm. Because of the points of the reformations in the grid connection process, which I hinted at in my speech, there is a requirement to be demonstrating this progression and demonstrating progress forward. So we took the decision to progress the application for the site, because ultimately any consideration of cable routes would be moot if the site were refused. Now, we have been looking at the routes from how we get from the site through to the Saul substation, knowing that we have the town of Reefham right in the middle. And look, that's obviously highly unpreferential to be going through the middle of Reefham, given the local disturbance, and we're highly cognizant of that. We've therefore been spending the time looking at routes which travel around to either the north or to the south, looking at going in the highway or in private land. And we have begun discussions with landowners to understand their acceptance of having a cable through their land, and which can then follow on to the survey and work which would accompany any planning application which came with that. But it comes back to the point of, in order for this solar farm to progress, we need to make sure that we have a cable route which is acceptable to under planning terms, and it will be accompanied by the assessments on ecology and flooding and transport, that which is deemed necessary, because without that cable route, then the scheme can't progress. But given all the issues which are progressing in the world of grid connections and electrical reforms, this is a strategy we have taken.
Can I just also add that one of the issues that we dealt with as part of this application was an environmental impact assessment that looked at certain issues, and that also deals with cumulative impact. So in our environmental assessment, we were considering the overlap with the RWE work, and that was all considered in our submission. Exactly the same would be for the grid connection. If planning permission was granted today, any application would most likely have an environmental impact assessment to deal with the cumulative impacts, including construction traffic, including disturbance for that grid connection to this development, and considering the impacts if this scheme is approved. So there is a mechanism through the environmental impact regulation assessment to assess the combined effect.
Sorry, the other question was to Chris. You mentioned that you have been in discussions with UK Power Networks and you have some agreement with them, and you talked about the date of 2027. I understand there's quite a lot of solar farms, and they obviously are all lining up to get a grid connection. Is there a end date or a time slot? Is it 2027 when you must connect to the grid? Can I just ask that? Thank you.
Absolutely. So the connection queue of projects which has been referred to is when you apply to UKPN for a connection, then you have your position based on your date of application, and everyone else who puts an application in afterwards is behind you and takes into consideration that you are already presumed to be connecting on the queue. The connection into the grid is really the first step of project development, and that happened a few years ago in the case of the Pettywell, because site selection very much hinges around where a feasible connection can be made onto the grid. Now, in the bigger national picture about the move to Clean Power 2030 and all the rest of these reforms which have been involving NESO and Ofgem, as well as all the DNOs like UKPN, they have had to take a bigger strategic view to say, look, the system needs changing based on what it was. And so over the course of last year and this year, a lot of steps being taken to move things around to make sure those projects which are do have a connection offer, such as we do, are valid ones to progress, and they haven't got these dud projects which are holding things up. And so we have been contacted by UKPN to say, if you're making good progress and you're proceeding, then we are able to connect you toward the end of 2027. If they get some new edict from National Grid or Ofgem which might change things, then they see that there could be a connection into the early 2030s. But we are currently on track for the October 2027 connection date.
Okay, I think we've covered this pretty well. I think we need to realise that if the planning application for the route is not accepted, then the solar farm will not be progressed. Bill?
I would just ask a question on that. Is there any, in the 5 kilometres, is there any envisage of not going through Reetham? It's an old town, it's very congested.
Doing my utmost to define a route which does not go through Reetham.
Okay, I have one question. We often see an application like this, the dual land use, and you've mentioned about sheep grazing. Do you actually have any sheep to graze on the land?
We don't have any sheep, but Albanwise is principally a farming enterprise, and therefore it would not be difficult to envisage to see sheep put on the site.
Okay, all right, thank you. Eleanor?
Thank you. I mean, my question is slightly linked to that. I'm quite interested in the long-term land management of the site. So the site's going to be completely surrounded by fencing. That will obviously impact the migration of animals that currently cross the site. Now, I understand there's going to be gaps in the fencing, but what kind of size animals will be able to get through the gaps? And also, presumably there's going to be cabling of some sort between the panels. So is there a risk of wildlife chewing that cabling? I mean, how do you protect against that?
Yeah, no. Excellent questions. So there's 2 points in there is about free movement of animals and the cable protection. May we have the master plan of the site up, please? And I can make reference to that. So the cabling, the fencing pretty much surrounds the 3 blocks of solar panels, and those being fields 1 and 4, fields 5, and the rest of the panels is in one or each 3 areas of fencing. And the form of fencing that will surround those is wooden post and wire mesh stock-proof fencing. So the gaps of the fencing itself is fairly large, about yay big, so certainly smaller animals and what have you easily traverse those. And as was shown up on one of the previous slides, we had the elevation plan of the fencing, and for larger mammals, badgers or similar, then you have periodic gaps in the fences to allow those animals to cross. There's no deeper burial of the fencing, so burrowing animals could move back and forth across the sites. And then certainly the cable corridor through the middle is unbound. And your second point on the protection of cables, so sheep being on solar farms has been a long-term practice, and solar installers are well versed in terms of how to ensure cables are contained within ducts or trays if they're above ground, or if they're contained below ground, to keep them away of either sheep or other animals.
Thank you.
Thank you. Just one further question about the management of the land. So there are situations in which sheep grazing is proposed and then it proves to be unsuccessful for a range of reasons. So I'm concerned about, is there going to be a very clear long-term management plan, and potentially could herbicides be used to, if sheep are unsuccessful, how are you going to manage the grassland?
So if we might answer that too, but I can cover the first part, and Lisa can supplement that one. So we made pains to state through the application that the site is solar farm ready, and it is our intention to have sheep graze across the site, because it is the double win of having the sheep grazing, but also they do the mowing, and they keep the weeds and the grass down from preventing shading on the panels. If there were to be any, if commercial factors had a part to play in not being able to graze sheep across the site, then an alternative would be required. And the main factor in that one is to stop the grass or any plants growing above the height of the panels. The minimum height would be 800 millimetres, which is actually a height set by having sheep on the site. And in those instances, there would be mowing, which would keep the site down. And so it is not anticipated that there'd be really any application of herbicide use. Any such use would be in line with general estate management and of the order of a person with a manual application for hard to reach parts. But across the site, there would be a mowing regime, and it's just a case about keeping them below 800 millimetres, because we're looking to put in sort of a seeded mix, which can then sort of flourish, and that in itself can support wildlife.
Okay,
One other element to that.
Yeah, and in terms of the biodiversity, we've, as part of this proposal, there's a section 106 that will secure a biodiversity management plan under the biodiversity net gain legislation. Then that's a 30-year commitment with monitoring visits, 8 monitoring visits over the period, which are secured through the legal agreement. And what the mandatory requirement under net gain does is, if things are not in line with the management plan, there is the ability to revise and improve the biodiversity over that period. So it's very tightly controlled under the new legislation and the monitoring regime, which we've secured through the section 106.
Okay, thank you. We'll go one last question, I think, from Peter.
Thanks, Chair. Thanks for your comments from the applicants. It's an observation, really. I'm seeing that the LVIA acknowledges that there would be major significant adverse effect for the first, well, let's call it the first year, because these things do tend to overrun. So that's an acknowledgement there that that is going to occur. You're going to be expecting 2,000 to 3,000 deliveries in the first 2 months on site in a very rural area, supplied by a very small road system. Also, one other little thing, if you're going to talk about sheep grazing, someone's got to manage them, and I've led to believe that sheep don't graze too well under solar panels, but that might be a side issue. One of my concerns is your solar panels, where are they manufactured? Are they imported? Do you know the supply chain and whether it's credible and whether it is, shall we say, a correct method of manufacture, if you follow my drift? Thank you. Yes.
Sorry, Lisa.
Shall I deal with that? Clearly it's a topical issue, and I believe it was on the radio this morning. The government are saying that they want to ensure that solar panel supply is not from slave labour. This issue was considered by the Secretary of State in a decision last year, and the Secretary of State basically said, in response to concerns that had been raised about ethical procurement, that he did not consider it an ethical procurement as a relevant planning matter in itself in the determinant of the application. And whilst he noticed the concerns of interested parties at that inquiry, the matter was not ascribed any weight in the planning balance. And I think this could be said about any development. Planning has only got so much reach. It can't control where materials for production of any development project come from, but clearly there is an ethical code within the solar industry, and I think with the government making a firm stand today, there will be assurances that supply chains will be ethical, and I think you can see from that decision made last year that it's not really a planning consideration, I'm afraid, that you can consider today.
Thank you. Just a quick secondary. Have you considered any alternative methods of where these solar panels would be fitted? Have you looked at any possibility of new developments on roofing panels?
So in terms of the progression of solar panels on roofs is something we equally support, and Alban Wise as a farming business cover many of our farming buildings with roof panels, and we are looking at where we can increase that. The statements which have come from the government's advisor on climate change matters, the Climate Change Committee, have stated that solar, in a mix of all other renewables, looking to be quadrupled, and that would come from both rooftop and ground mount. So we have the ground mount proposal here at Pettywell. We as a company embody that sort of strive, and so we're looking to utilise our buildings by that rooftop energy as well.
Okay, thank you. Can I ask you to return to your seats, please? And I'd like to call Councillor Greg Peck, please. You have 5 minutes, Greg.
Thank you, Chair. Yes, I'm the County Councillor for the Wreatham Division, which is why I'm here today. The National Planning Policy Framework, NPPF, states that we should avoid building solar parks on best and most versatile farmland. As you're aware, the Pettywell site comes under this category. Jerome Mayhew MP for Broadland asked the Secretary of State for clarification of the new government's policy, and at the back end of last year got the following response. The government places great importance upon our agricultural and food production, and this is reflected in the National Planning Policy Framework. The framework is clear that local planning authorities should recognise the economic and other benefits of the best and most versatile agricultural land. Where significant development of agricultural land is shown to be necessary, including ground-mounted solar, the planning authority should seek to use poorer quality land in preference to that of higher quality. I know you're all aware of that, but I thought I would repeat it. In the last 9 months, we have seen applications for solar parks covering 22,000 acres of farmland in Norfolk, with more in the pipeline. We currently have 3 other sites being applied for and 2 already approved in my county division alone. I understand that the applications expect to connect this site to the Sewell substation, as has been discussed already, where there, as I understand also, there is limited capacity. I would like the applicants to confirm, which I think they already did, that they have a grid connection agreed with Power Networks. As I understand, there is a queue to get connected, and unlike what the applicant said, I believe this could stretch out to 2035, and that's coming from other applicants that have told me that. I also understand they plan to connect to the Sewell via underground cable on a route to be agreed later. As has been mentioned, this is 5 kilometres from the substation, and they have indicated they would connect by underground cable, which would of course be preferable to any alternative. But are they aware that the area is already being crisscrossed by underground cables from 3 onshore wind farm projects, work which will be ongoing for many years to come? Do they see a problem crossing current agreed cable routes? The schemes coming forward now, such as this one, I suspect because of the lack of grid capacity, include applications for battery storage facilities. The batteries are lithium, which if they catch fire are impossible to put out. And I noticed they mentioned water. Well, water will not put out a lithium battery fire. The fire service can't extinguish them and will just have to let them burn, with all the resulting pollution that will generate from that. Lithium is highly polluting and almost impossible to dispose of. Food production and food security is something we should all be concerned about, especially in these uncertain times. As indicated by the MPPF and the Secretary of State, we should avoid building solar parks on highly productive agricultural land. They claim that after the period of the application, the land can return to food production. That will never happen. It will effectively become a brownfield site. Over a 10-year period, the panels degrade and need to be refurbished if they are to remain efficient. The degradation also means they are shedding microplastics into the soil and thus ultimately into the watercourses. I've been involved in a number of applications for solar parks, both as a district and county councillor over the past 10 years. They all claim they would have sheep grazing and bees. I have yet to see one where that has remained to be so. In fact, the only one I am aware of quickly took the sheep off because they were rubbing up against the stanchions of the panels and damaging them. How do barn owls quarter over a field of solar panels? How do fields of plastic and glass enhance the numbers of skylarks? This is just greenwashing what is basically an industrial site. This application is in the wrong place, too large, and will destroy good quality productive farmland, as well as destroy some wonderful Norfolk countryside and wildlife habitat. I therefore hope the committee will do the right thing and refuse this application. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you, Councillor Peck. Any clarification from Councillor Peck? Peter.
Thank you. Greg, have you, as a county councillor, have you any concerns regarding the road network in the area that's likely to be used? Thank you.
Yes, very much so, because as you're aware, with the current cable network, where we're being crisscrossed by 3 different companies, you've seen the disruption caused by that already. In fact, I've got businesses in Reefham already contacted me about the loss of business, particularly the local pub. They've lost a lot of money because people can't get into the place because the coordination between the wind farm companies is not very good. So the roads are being blocked all the time, and it's making people not bother going that way, frankly.
Thank you very much, Greg. Thank you, Chair. You talked about a lithium fire not being able to be put out by the fire brigade. This battery storage seems to be right in the middle of this proposed solar farm. It looks quite difficult to get to. It's also about just on the outskirts of Reetham. I think it's about 500 metres from the outskirts of Reetham. Have you spoken to the local fire brigade and just to ask their opinion, or have you got an opinion on that, Greg? Thank you.
Yes, I have got an opinion on it, and I think I have spoken to the fire service about it, and they have made their position known. They will look at this application, as it says in there, they see there isn't a problem. That's what they say, they can cope with it. That doesn't mean that they will put that fire out. That means they will sit back and let it burn out, because they can't put it out. And all this talk of water being on the site will have been no use at all. I mean, you've seen lithium battery fires, and you've seen what happens at Luton Airport when once the electric cars go up, they can't stop, they just let them burn out. So I think the fire service's position is they don't want to make a political judgment, so they're staying out of that. But I know from talking to the fire service people that they are very concerned about lithium battery fires.
Sorry, Chairman, can I just come in on that sort of lithium point? So obviously we do have a process in terms of consulting with our statutory consultees around fire risk. I am going to disagree with the councillor in terms of being a political decision from the fire service. They will look at the technical process and what is safe in terms of those lithium-ion batteries and the process of doing so. We have dealt with a large number of lithium-ion batteries. We are aware in terms of how the safety is managed. Obviously, there's a completely separate safety process which the planning system should not overlap. So we are required, and that's what's set out nationally, to rely upon that other legislation to ensure the safety of lithium-ion batteries. We have looked at this in some detail. We do know in terms of the processes and the structure of the lithium-ion battery, they have their own fire suppression systems inbuilt within those. So that is one process in addition to kind of what that reactive process is with the fire service in terms of potential risk of fire. So I think, one, in terms of the planning system shouldn't replicate what other regulatory systems cover. And two, I think you can be confident in terms of the fire plan and what the fire service have commented that can be adequately controlled.
Okay, thank you, Councillor Peck. If you'd like to return to your seat.
Thank you, Chair.
We'll go to full discussion. Who would like to start? Eleanor.
Yes, thank you, Chair. I mean, in a report that came out in April, earlier this month, from the Copernicus Climate Change Institute, we now know that Europe is warming at double the rate of the rest of the world. And in my view, we actually need to be looking at being on a war footing in terms of the threat that climate change actually poses. Our lifestyles are sadly demanding more and more power, not less. We need, as a country, to be far more self-sufficient in low-carbon energy production. There is a big issue in this part of the country, certainly in terms of the balance between use of highly productive farmland versus energy security for the country. And unfortunately, there are only certain sites that are suitable for this sort of energy production. I'm looking forward to the government providing a land use framework that will help us to make decisions, but unfortunately that land use framework has not been published. In an ideal world, I'd like to see more installation of solar on roofs. I'd like to see more UK manufacturing of panels and infrastructure. I'd like to see raised panels, much higher raised panels on solar farms to grow a wide range of crops underneath and to allow for soil regeneration. But we are here determining this planning application before us. I think we also need to recognise that farming is going to change. As climate change impacts kick in, we won't be growing the crops that we're currently growing. We will having to be look at different types of crops. We're possibly going to have to be looking at indoor farming. That will require more power as well. So we need to have this infrastructure in place for future generations. I do understand there's a lot of strong local opinion against this scheme, but planning policy clearly gives significant weight to the installation of low carbon technologies. As we've seen the revisions of the MPPF coming forward, gradually that view of the government is becoming stronger and stronger. And as I said, there's only certain areas in which we can actually put these technologies, and we do need to be close to grid connections. And for Norfolk and Suffolk and probably Essex, we are probably going to have to absorb what might be seen to be more than our fair share of these sorts of technologies. And it is a difficult balance because there is a lot of productive farmland. I would say, though, that in the site choice for this application, the majority, at least, of the land is grade 3. So we're not looking at grade 1. So the installation, we've heard it will have an impact. Of course it will, on the landscape. It will have an impact on biodiversity. It will have an impact on some of the local heritage assets. But I do, having looked at the report and heard the presentation, I do think that great efforts have actually been made to mitigate these. And I don't consider them to be, the impacts to be adverse enough to turn this application down on planning policy grounds. And I do take on board all of the comments from the statutory consultees. There are none of those statutory consultees have made what I consider to be major objections. And a number of conditions have been recommended. So I personally am happy to support this application.
Thank you, Eleanor. I just asked Richard to put up the land grading slide. If I can find it. Is it the beginning? That's the one. No, but do the other one. That one. I think you will see the amount of grade 3 land available in Norfolk, and near the site there is actually grade 2 land which is not being used. I do echo Eleanor's comments, I must admit. Joe, do you want to say something?
Yes. I have some very grave concerns about this site. As you're aware, this is, I think, 180 acres of this 200-acre site is best and most versatile land. And as you can clearly see on page 14 in the ministerial statement, solar and protecting our food security was produced in May 24. This is very beautiful, I would say bucolic, undulating countryside right next to the Georgian market town of Reetham, which I would say is a tourism asset, and I know the centre of Reetham and much of Reetham is a conservation area. This also borders the 900 metres of Marriott's Way. It's an important part of our green infrastructure, and we have the non-designated tourism asset of Whitwell Station, and also just up the line, Reetham Station. Now, one of the local people talked about the circular walk, and I know that circular walk very well myself, and a lot of people park at either one of the stations, Reetham or Whitwell, and then do the walk round because it's not too far and it's a very nice walk. 900 metres of this is going to be adjacent this solar farm, And actually, yes, we've seen some pictures of it, and I think that the trees were in leaf, but during the winter months when we haven't got so much leaf, some of the embankment is fairly high nearer to Whitwell Station to the south end, and you'll be able to clearly see the view across this solar field. The report talks about intensive farming, and I had a drive round on Monday. I don't believe there is intensive farming there, and there is definitely evidence of countryside stewardship. I'm a farmer myself, and I can recognise these things. There's lots of hedgerows, and I would imagine, knowing farming practices, having worked in agriculture for 30 years, that farm is already in some form of stewardship and will have grass or wildflower margins. I think the proposed link to Saul substation is tenuous. I'm very concerned that the people of Reetham will have even more disruption, and there'll be disruption to local businesses. There doesn't seem to be an indicative route for the cable route to link with Saul substation at the moment, and I think that's very unnerving for local people in the Reetham area, and it was echoed by the town councillor who spoke. So I think we should either be looking to refuse this application or at least defer it so the cable route can come back as a coterminous application along with this application, because without the connection to the grid, I find this application to be superfluous.
I think I did mention before about the cable route. If it doesn't go as well as the applicant expects, the solar farm's not going to be going ahead. So we have to look at this in planning terms. Yes. And I understand it's quite an emotive subject with Reetham being so close. But we have to, if you want to object to this, you need to tell me what policy you are objecting to.
Yes, so I propose Planning Committee object to this application. I think there could be harm done to local businesses and local tourism businesses, and I disagree with the comments made on the economic benefits of short-term employment. So I don't think this accords with policy GC1. I think it does not accord with policy GC2. I think there will be an adverse impact on the local area and the bucolic countryside, and I think there will be a general diminution of the rural landscape, because the approach to Reetham, you'll drive straight past this this site. I'm also worried about the effect on the rural lanes, so I do not think this accords with policy TS3 and the effect on the highways. And I'm also worried, and I do not really think this accords with policy GC4, because I think people will lose some reasonable amenity while accessing Marriott's Way. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you. I'm going to ask Tracy to come back on this. You probably know the policies better than I do.
I think I need Richard to kind of come in. I guess just picking up kind of how you've gone through those, Councillor Coppeston, in terms of the harm to businesses and tourism and the economic benefits, I think we would need to understand how we would substantiate that. Clearly, that's a matter of probably planning balance rather than something. So I think to start with, our starting point is to determine the application in accordance with the development plan, unless material considerations indicate otherwise. You've got a whole raft of other material considerations, national policies, etc. But your starting point is there harm that means that you would refuse against some of the policies that you've listed? And then we would move on to, okay, there is that harm, but we also need to balance kind of the renewable energy provision, the harms and benefits. So I think kind of your first points are around potential giving less weight to the economic benefits of the scheme and greater harms in terms of the economy around the impact of the proposal. Richard, I'm just going to ask you to pick up the GC 1, 2 and 4. If we can just kind of go through those and just look at those particular policies.
So just starting with GC 1, just putting it up here. So obviously the presumption is in favour of sustainable development. Obviously, as the report said, we've gone through the economic, social, environmental considerations, the objectives. We've identified there has been some impacts, but obviously we have found that we have been able to either satisfactorily mitigate them, or where there have been some harms, we feel that the benefits of the renewable energy scheme fundamentally outweigh those harms identified, although very slight harms in the overall total that we've found. So in terms of GC1, we certainly felt as an overall balancing judgment that this was sustainable development. If we move on to GC2, we've got there the location of the new development. That states that new development will be accommodated within the settlement limits. Outside of these limits, development will be acceptable as long as it doesn't result in adverse impact, significant adverse impact. And again, just goes back to that earlier comment that we haven't found that significant adverse impact. And it also states in this policy it will be permitted where it accords with specific allocation and a policy of development plan. The particular key policy, therefore, on that is GC5, which is the renewable energy policy. GC5 is quite clear, and again, bearing in mind this is a 2015 local plan document, it says clearly that proposals for renewable energy, associated infrastructure, integration of renewable technology will be encouraged where its impacts are or can be made acceptable. A time limited planning permission may be granted where the source of power is temporary. Now, obviously, since 2015, we've had a really strong raft of documents from central government that we are finding there are consistent appeal decisions that are favouring renewable energy, unless you've identified significant clear harms, which we haven't on this particular application. GC4, that is the design policy, and again, it just talks about development expected to achieve a high standard design. Talks about environment, character and appearance of an area, reinforcing local distinctiveness, meeting the reasonable amenity needs, considering the impacts on the amenity of existing properties, efficient use of land, accessible to sustainable means of transport, creating safe environments, appropriate infrastructure, sustainable mixed communities, and minimising resource and energy consumption. It's a very sort of generic policy around design, but obviously we've carefully considered that landscape master plan and how we've been able to design it into this environment. So we found no particular conflict with that policy either. So taking all those into account, we also draw on, like I say, the very strong national emphasis. And I think you picked up on something to do with the written ministerial statement. I think Lisa Jackson mentioned this earlier. When we have obviously looked at it in the past, that was based on the old NPPF. The current NPPF has actually deleted the reference to food security because there's a belief within central government that food security should not be can sit harmoniously alongside energy security. So we did have that written ministerial statement by the previous Conservative government, but obviously that was a point in time, May last year. And since then, obviously, the sort of national pitch around energy infrastructure and support for energy development has increased, if anything. So I think, that written ministerial statement, whilst it does sit in the archive documents, it is very much of its time. And I think we feel that, the issue of food security is clearer through the NPPF as it has been revised in December last year to remove that footnote on that aspect. So that's how we've concluded the scheme, Chair.
Can I just add, just to Councillor Coppleton, I think you'd mentioned policy TS3, which is obviously highway safety. Just a comment around that for members. Obviously, we have the Highway Authority that have looked at this very carefully in terms of the highway safety and construction. They have concluded an acceptable scheme in accordance with our policies and in accordance with the NPPF. So the NPPF does require us to, or basically says we should only prevent or refuse schemes on highway safety grounds where the impacts would be severe, taking into account all reasonable scenarios. So you do have your statutory authority advising you that it wouldn't meet those tests, so they will consider that in terms of whether or not we could justify a highways reason for refusal. So I think in the round, just in terms of commenting in terms of the policies that you've listed, I think there was obviously a landscape reason, sort of quality character, how people enjoy and perceive the landscape as they move through that, coming through Marriott's Way. So I think that's perhaps something to explore. But I think there are some, I would urge some caution, certainly around the highways matters on that refusal reason for you.
Anybody else want it? Peter?
Well, notwithstanding the comments, I think we really need to make this decision rather than looking at the dry and dusty policy statements. We need to look at this and make a decision on the impact that it's going to have, not just now, but of future generations. This is something that's going to affect the area for the next 2 generations, 40 plus years. Yes. It'll revert to a brownfield site. Let's make no doubt about that. It's not going to go back to a nice a rural setting as it is. We need to make this assessment on and draw a line in the sand really as to what is going to be required. We live in an area, highly arable agricultural land. I do not see a need to waste any more of our farming land on a scheme like this when there are other alternatives. The world has changed in the last couple of years dramatically. Yes. We need to be more food dependent. I'm sorry, I disagree with Councillor Lamming regarding the situation of whether we really need to put the priority on power supply ahead of food. We need to be more food dependent. We live in, as I said earlier, we live in a rural area. We need to be protecting our own food infrastructure. There are other alternatives to solar power. Yeah. Thank you.
Peter, all due regard, I think the dry and dusty policy statements are the ones that we need to adhere to. And if this goes to appeal, they're the ones that's going to be decided upon, not emotions, I'm afraid. Joe, did you still want to go ahead with your vote to?
Yes, I propose we refuse that, and I understand Councillor Berry is seconding it.
Okay, we'll do that first. All those in favour of objecting to this proposal, please raise your hand. Okay, we go to the recommendation to authorise the Assistant Director of Planning to approve subject to conditions. All those in favour, please. All those against? That's 3. Okay.
And just for clarity, Chair, that was including the additional conditions that were on the update sheet.
And also on biodiversity net gain, which standard conditions around the biodiversity, the delivery of the habitat management monitoring plan, which seems to have been missed off the end, but
okay, sorry.
thank you.
I think as we've been going for nearly 2 hours, we'll have a break here. 5 minutes, or 5 or 10 minutes, and then come back.